Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. My name is Chooks, and today we're going to be exploring better practices on how we can effectively do research and achieve research excellence. With me in the house today is the CEO and founder of Akabana Consulting, Dr. Matthew Soulter. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Chooks. Great to be with you.
Excellent. We just want to get a little bit about who you are and what you do. So, can you give us a little bit about your background, your research and academic or even professional background, and what excites you about the work you do as CEO of Akabana Consulting?
Yeah, thanks. As you said, Akabana Consulting is a boutique consulting company. It's been going since the end of 2021, and we offer services for advice and consulting services for publishing for a wide range of society publishers and other organizations involved in scholarly publishing. My background is really my academic background is chemistry. I have a degree and a PhD in chemistry from Imperial College, and for a while I was an academic researcher. I did a postdoc at the University of Tohoku. I was a lecturer subsequently at King's College. I was back to Imperial College and then went to King's College as a lecturer. And my final academic position was a team leader at the University of Tokyo. Japan has featured quite strongly in my professional background. And after my academic career, I went into the private sector. I was the publisher in chief and editor of Macmillan Science Communication, which is now part of Springer Nature. Subsequent to that, I moved to Institute of Physics Publishing, where I headed up their Asia Pacific operations. And then in 2016, I moved to where I am now, in America. I live in Maryland, America, and I was the publisher at the American Physical Society. And as I said, at the end of last year, I founded Akabana Consulting.
Excellent. It was really nice to hear about your background. I can see you've got a vast array of experience, both in academia and private practice, and also as a researcher. I think my first question, as we think about and work towards better practices in research, would be the angle with regards to predatory and clone journals. So, the first question would be around how do you define predatory and clone journals, and how can technology support in detecting these or support researchers in how they approach these?
Yeah, so it's a really important area for people seeking to publish. And interestingly, I don't believe there's actually a formal definition of what a predatory journal is. People tried to do that most recently, an article published in Nature magazine a couple of years ago. But what predatory journals and clone journals have in common is that there's a kind of series of factors that they have in common that allow people to identify them as a predatory journal. As we know, normal journals, regular non-predatory journals, seek to maintain high standards of integrity and high standards of peer review, high standards of service and editorial input from the journal. And predatory journals are not really concerned with any of that. They're not concerned with preserving the integrity of the scientific record or making sure that science is properly assessed and peer reviewed. They're really about using researchers' work to make money for that journal, often for asking for a processing fee for publishing articles, and then really offering none of the services that typical non-predatory journals offer. Typically with predatory journals, they tend to be open access. Of course, I should stress that doesn't mean that open access journals are all predatory. That's absolutely not the case. But predatory journals tend to be open access, and they tend to offer such things as impossibly fast turnarounds of peer review, and then not do the peer review. They then put articles up on journal websites, which sometimes are difficult to differentiate from genuine websites. And their main purpose is simply to earn money off unsuspecting researchers, and really offer none of the peer review and the promotional and curation services that real journals exist to do. So it's a huge problem, because using predatory journals, where there is essentially no check on the validity of the science, or whether it is impactful or even correct, can really introduce bogus science and very questionable research into the scientific literature. It damages the quality of scientific literature overall, and it can be picked up unknowingly by on the internet, on social media, by unsuspecting news outlets who sort of promote research that really hasn't been checked or validated. And that's something, which now there is an ongoing kind of question mark, a lack of public trust over science. It further erodes public trust in the validity of science. Not to mention, of course, the financial angle where, money from universities and money from researchers' grants go to pay for journals which offer no services whatsoever. And in fact, I think, in my opinion, damage the validity of the scientific record. So it's a really big issue.
In terms of these challenges, most researchers will face with regards to predatory and clone journals, what are your strategies or your suggested strategies on how researchers can maintain that level of research integrity, avoid misconduct, and also deal with these challenges with regards to predatory and clone journals?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think I should say that, I believe that the vast majority of researchers are honest and want to publish in the most appropriate and highest quality venue that they can. When I was a researcher, there wasn't so much a problem with predatory journals, and so it wasn't an issue that I faced when I was an active researcher. But many, particularly early career researchers now, who feel a great pressure to publish lots of papers, sometimes see predatory journals unknowingly as a place where they can publish quickly and they can publish open access with that at low cost. And so we can see why people will be tempted into, by unwittingly, tempted into using predatory journals. I think in order to avoid that and to minimize the chance of you falling into that trap, I think it's really important that researchers do some due diligence before they submit to a journal. That can in the first instance, it can really be asking yourself, when you look at a particular journal that you may not have published in before, does this look like a real journal? Does this look like other journals I published in? For example, is the website credible? Are there policies that are clearly stated on the website? Can you see an editorial board for the journal? And if you can, do you recognize it? If there's researchers in the field, can you see maybe friends, colleagues, or well-known researchers in that field who are on the editorial board? That tends to lend credibility to that journal, and it's a good sign that the journal is genuine. Ask around with your colleagues, your supervisor, people in the lab with you. Do you know much about this journal? If you're concerned, do an online search for the journal, above and beyond the journal website. So it's typically red flags would be when you don't see those kind of things, when you don't see a credible editorial board, when you don't see policies around the publishing practices, when you don't see publishers' policies around how your work will be archived, whether that journal is a member of a noted industry body. There are a number of publisher organizations that support quality and integrity in publishing. Things like the STM organization or OASPA for open access journals, or COPE. DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, for example. All of these bodies are created by publishers and researchers to make sure that there is credibility and there is quality in that research. So when you don't see those things, or you see other things, for example, like if you're asked up front to pay a processing fee before you even submit or at the time of submission, that for me is a big red flag. As far as I'm aware, there are no journals that actually charge you to submit. They may, of course, open access journals may charge an open article processing charge when your paper has been accepted, but not up front. There are cases of people who have unwittingly paid that, and that's the last they hear from the journal. Their money disappears and their paper has disappeared again. And the big thing to consider, of course, is if you submitted that paper to that journal, it's very, very difficult if it disappears for you to submit it to another journal, a journal which could be more credible. And so that's a real problem with your science. And so all of these things, I think there are ways to minimize your chance of being kind of hoodwinked. And one last resource I'd like to suggest to people, there is a website called Think, Check, Submit. It's a website which is put together again by publishers and authors together, which gives you some of the criteria I've just discussed and more besides, that allow you to think and guide you through the process for thinking about whether this is the right journal for you. So there is advice online, as well as just common sense, which you would use yourself. And always, I think, if you have any concerns, I'm sure that the organizations such as OASP or the DOAJ and others would be open to having an inquiry from you, just asking about the bona fides of a particular journal.
Thank you. I think the big takeaway there is the need for diligence and actually doing the work before you do a submission. So thank you for sharing that. That's really, really important for any researchers. Um, the issue that has been in the media a little bit is the angle with regards to self plagiarism.
Mm.
I think one of the things I heard back in the day in a previous role is, it's my work. Why can't I just cite myself and do that? So my next question is in regards to what self-plagiarism is and why is this an issue and how can researchers actually avoid it?
Yes, it's a really important issue. And again, I think the issue, generally speaking, is not people who are deliberately trying to self-plagiarize, use their own work. Let's think about what plagiarism. Plagiarism itself is when you use some data or text, or in certain cases, it could be music or whatever, that is created by somebody else and use it and pass it off as if it's your own work. Now, the self-plagiarism, of course, the person you're plagiarizing is yourself. And that's why it's difficult for people to understand. They say, well, heck, I made this, I created it. Why, as you said, why shouldn't I be able to use it? And there are two real reasons why that's not a good idea. The first of them actually is that if you, depending on what license you signed when you let's say you published one paper and you wanted to use part of that, depending on what license you used you obtained when you published the first paper, actually that paper, that work you might not have the copyright in that paper anymore, depending on what the publisher you signed with the publisher. So that's point one. But point two really is generally not good practice, and it's considered to be unethical to reuse without any citation or without any significant addition fragments of your pieces of your own work. So it's really, it's understandable. And for many people, for example, you may have labored long and hard over an introduction to your paper, and you spent ages refining it, and you've kind of really made this look and sound great. And you're thinking now, oh, do I have to really rewrite the whole thing? Why can't I just stick it in there? And you can't really do that because the expectation of a new manuscript that is published is that you would have some new content there, new science and new insights. And so just, cutting and pasting and reusing what you've had before is not really in that spirit, and it reflects badly on you as a researcher. The second thing is, of course, that each paper you do, as I said, should be a development. So it's unlikely that, just by cutting and pasting or using big sections of text, that you would actually be writing the best paper you could write. So it's really important, to not do that. And from a publisher's perspective, and in, my recent career in the last, 18, 20 years as a science communicator and publisher, I know that journals really don't look very favorably on self-plagiarism. It's not kind of illegal in the sense that you're going to be had up in court. It just really reflects badly on you. It reflects badly on the journal. And publishers really seek to avoid that because I think in the mind of a publisher, it might be that if you are using and cutting, pasting and using a section of text or data unchanged, what other parts of your job as a researcher are you not doing properly? Because to do that, it's frankly not really very professional as a researcher. And it calls into question your professionalism. And that's something you don't want to do, right? Obviously. And I don't think anybody wants to be thought of in that way. So the best way to do it is to avoid self-plagiarism wherever you can. If we want to talk about how we avoid that, I think the best way to avoid it is really to try and write as much new text as possible. If you use data from the previous paper, you have to be absolutely clear about where you got that data and use it in comparison with new additional data. You have a set of data before maybe, and then if there's more data you've collected, you might add the two things together for comparison. But it has to have a real scientific purpose. You can't just put it all together and say, pass it off as a single data set. If you're quoting yourself and there's a short phrase you really want to use, please put that in quotes, in quotation marks, and reference where that comes from. I think being open and transparent about these things is very important indeed.
Great. These are really great strategies. I think one of the things I'm hearing there is the need for thinking of the new paper as a new paper, not trying to just pull things from the old paper into the new paper. And also thinking about how you can update the data and look at even citing or coding yourself, like you do coding someone else.
You're right. I mean, there's a term for, I mean, part of this pressure comes from the pressure to publish so many papers. I mean, and that's a discussion that's been going on for a long time. But what journals particularly are not very keen to do is to, you may have heard the term salami slicing. Anybody who's been to the deli and bought salami knows they cut it in very thin slices. And the point is that, if you stretch your data and your ideas out over too many papers and just give very kind of thin slices of research, it's not very good for the reader. It doesn't tell them the full story. It doesn't, you can't really present your ideas in a well-rounded, complete way. And for publishers, publishers sort of view quite dimly the idea of you trying to just, slice the paper very thinly to get as many papers out of the work as possible. It's a balance that comes with experience, but really, as you say, being very careful about how you use that additional data and making sure every paper really adds something to the scientific record, and think about it as your kind of legacy as a researcher. You want the reputation of giving very coherent, interesting, insightful, useful research and really making positive contributions to the literature. I think that's what we all want as researchers. While we're on the topic of self-plagiarism, it's really important. There are ways that technology can help you avoid that. When you're writing a paper, there are tools out there you can use that checks the originality of your paper, it checks it with published papers online, and it can give you a kind of score. I've seen examples where, the bits, it's a bit like a disclosing tablet when you brush your teeth. The bits where you plagiarize come up red, not plagiarize, but the bits which are very similar to the literature come up red or they come up colored. And what that helps you to do is it helps you to realize that when you're rewriting, that maybe unwittingly you didn't intend to, but you got a bit too close to where you were before. And I think the really important thing about using this kind of software is it's there to help you be honest. I've met some people who think that using that kind of software implies some kind of guilt on their part, that when they use it, people will think they're trying to get away with something shady. And I would say it's completely the opposite. By using that kind of plagiarism detection software, you're actually trying to be a responsible researcher, and you're actually trying to do the right thing, and make sure that you haven't inadvertently strayed over a line. So I would encourage people to check out those. There are a number of them available, and I think they can be really useful in, when you're getting to a later draft of your paper, to say, let's just check this to make sure that, I am giving enough new stuff that I haven't, inadvertently in writing a paper. And we know that papers go through many drafts, and, it's easy to forget where you are sometimes in which draft you're on, to just check as you go along. And I think to do that is actually a really courageous and a right and very responsible thing to do as a researcher.
Thanks for listening. This concludes part 1 of our conversation. Please join us again for part 2.